They owned 17 star systems and believed no one could ever bring them down. But how do you stay invincible when you awaken the fury of an entire species driven by love and loss? Asterisk asterisk, the VX thought they had the perfect method for controlling any civilization they encountered. Their snake-like bodies, their cold stares, and their public punishments made everyone tremble in their presence. That was how they turned fear into the perfect weapon. Whenever they rolled into a new solar system, they made a harsh example of anyone who dared defy them. Most were too afraid to stand up. The VX believed terror was enough to keep everybody in line. And for a long time, nobody proved them wrong. Then they discovered humanity. Now let's go back a bit and see how things started on a small human colony called New Haven. This place was on the outer edges of human exploration, located on a rugged world under two suns in the Proxima Centauri system. People who lived there were not your typical settlers just looking for an easy life. They were dreamers, explorers, and risk-takers who found hope in a distant patch of stars. Life at New Haven was peaceful and bright. Families built homes with their own hands, grew crops in strange purple soil, and taught children to watch for sunsets that turned the sky into rivers of gold and lavender. Every dawn felt like a miracle, and every night offered an infinite canvas of constellations, reminding them that they were part of something bigger. The people of New Haven were used to helping each other. They all believed that if you worked hard and looked out for your neighbor, you could build a future worth fighting for. Over the years, they developed a culture of compassion. They made sure no one went hungry, no one felt lonely, and no one had to fight their battles alone. The air around the colony felt charged with possibility. Parents told stories of Earth's history, of wars ended and alliances formed, of wonders in deep space that no one had seen yet. They also joked about the variety of alien life that humans had already encountered, some friendly, some neutral, but none that had been especially dangerous. So they assumed the galaxy was big enough for everyone to coexist. Then everything changed. The VX, who had grown extremely confident in their intimidation tactics, decided New Haven would be a perfect addition to their empire. They had studied humans from a distance and noticed these strange beings spent a lot of time caring for their young, sharing resources, and expressing emotions openly. The VX saw empathy as a weakness. In their view, any race that bonded so closely with their children must be easy to dominate. Overlord Cyrix, the supreme leader of the VX, approved what he called standard procedures: show up, use fear, make an example of a few colonists, and watch the rest beg for mercy. That was the plan. That on a quiet morning, while people were still sipping their warm drinks and planning their daily tasks, VX warships appeared in orbit. They came so quickly that few even knew what was happening until it was too late. VX ground troops landed with a swagger that came from countless victories. They walked through the colony and started putting on a display of power, pushing people around, tearing up equipment, and showing off advanced weapons that hummed with menacing energy. The colonists tried to remain calm. They asked the VX to leave, or at least explain why they were there. But the VX only laughed. That a group of VX soldiers saw a small child, Ellie Mason, clutching a homemade toy spaceship, curiosity lighting up her eyes as she watched the imposing alien figures. The soldiers thought this would be the perfect time to demonstrate their cruelty, just as they had on every other world they had conquered. They never expected what would follow. Ellie wasn't doing anything provocative. She was just there, an innocent bystander in this cosmic chessboard. But the VX believed in making a brutal first impression. One soldier raised his weapon, powered it up, and fired a single blast. Ellie fell instantly, her toy spaceship dropping beside her in a single heartbeat. The atmosphere of New Haven changed forever. A wave of horror and rage washed over the entire colony. Mothers shielded their children. Fathers clenched their fists. Friends felt tears burning their eyes. But deeper than the grief, an ember of something powerful and relentless began to glow in each heart. It was as though a switch had been flipped inside them. The VX, smug as ever, thought these humans would drop to their knees and beg for mercy. They had killed children before in other conquests, and usually that was enough to break any population's will. However, humans responded differently. That Ellie's father, Thomas Mason, knelt by his daughter's still form. He did not scream. He did not lash out in reckless anger. Instead, he closed her eyes and gently picked up her small toy spaceship. The entire colony fell into a heavy silence, and for a moment, even the VX seemed unsure of how to proceed. Then Thomas Mason stood up, his expression grim and composed in a way that hinted at dangerous possibilities. This moment would be remembered across the galaxy as the spark that ignited one of the most shocking uprisings in interstellar history. The colony of New Haven had always been rumored to house more than just farmers and explorers. Some whispered that retired soldiers lived there, people who had once served Earth Special Forces, but no one ever confirmed it. The tragedy of Ellie's death brought that rumor into cold, hard reality. In fact, nearly every adult on New Haven had once been part of a secret program, an elite unit trained for worst-case scenarios on faraway worlds. They had always hoped those skills would never be needed again. However, that day proved that hope alone was not enough. Right after the horrific incident, a quiet radio signal was sent. It was a distress call unlike any other. It used ancient communication codes to ensure the VX wouldn't intercept it. It was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. Mason Protocol initiated. Many years before, during the earliest expansions of humankind, the leaders of Earth had agreed on a hidden safety measure. If a remote colony ever came under attack by a hostile force, this protocol would alert a stealth fleet that was always on standby just outside standard shipping routes, hidden from prying sensors. And that was exactly what Thomas Mason set into motion. Within hours, the VX noticed unusual interference with their data streams. Something was jamming their signals, but they didn't panic. They assumed it was a desperate act by frightened colonists. They had dealt with such minor resistance many times. Their real plan was to impose a heavier dose of fear by capturing and publicly punishing a few of New Haven's leaders. That's how they had always done it. So they deployed squads to round up key figures, starting with Thomas Mason. The squads never came back. Out of the shadows, groups of humans began a carefully orchestrated defense. They moved with a discipline and unity that shocked the VX troops. These colonists had advanced weapons hidden away, gear that could fry alien armor, and cut through VX machinery like it was made of paper. They used cunning tactics, ambushes, decoys, and well-timed strikes. But there was more to it than pure strategy. There was a cold rage, the kind of anger born from losing something precious and irreplaceable. The VX had no idea how to handle an enemy who fought with such purpose. Meanwhile, in orbit, a fleet of sleek, black warships emerged from hidden warpoints. The VX fleet, which had been hovering above the planet like a menacing storm cloud, found itself suddenly jammed. The new arrivals didn't broadcast any demands. They simply started disabling VX ships one by one with targeted blasts that short-circuited their power cores. It was a method designed to spare lives whenever possible. But the message was clear. The VX were not in control anymore. On the surface, the fighting intensified in small pockets. VX foot soldiers, trained to inspire dread, found themselves on the defensive. They realized they had no psychological edge here. The humans didn't beg or cower. They advanced with a silent determination, as if they were performing a sacred duty. They used every scrap of knowledge they had about the land, the climate, and the VX's weaknesses. Some colonists set traps near canyons. Others launched drone swarms that disrupted the enemy's targeting systems. All the while, the VX grew more and more unsettled by the calm expressions they faced. They saw no fear in the eyes of these people, only heartbreak and unbreakable resolve. As word of the conflict spread, Admiral Chun of Earth's Shadow Fleet made contact with Overlord Cyrix. She sent a brief transmission that flickered across Cyrix's command console. Cyrix, coiled in his throne-like seat, watched as Chen's face appeared on the monitor. She explained that the people attacking VX soldiers were not a formal military, but rather grieving parents and neighbors who had decided to protect their home. To Cyrix's horror, she revealed that they didn't even require Earth's full naval power. They only needed a fraction of the stealth fleet to disable the VX presence in the region. The rest was personal. Fathers, mothers, and friends who had lost someone dear or refused to see another child die. Cyrix, for the first time, felt an odd prick of fear. Not because he was physically threatened, he was miles away in a fortified ship, but because he realized the VX's core tactic had failed. Fear itself had met a stronger opponent. Love, so fierce it turned into righteous anger. The VX's intimidation was useless against people who wouldn't bow down no matter the risk. Cyrix thought about pushing forward, about calling in more ships and doubling down on brutality, but something in Admiral Chen's eyes made him hesitate. He saw no bluff. He saw only unwavering certainty that the VX had crossed a line they should never have approached. The collapse of the VX Empire was swift and staggering. News traveled to their other worlds that humans had not just resisted, but overwhelmed the VX invasion force. This was almost impossible to believe, so local VX governors attempted to verify the information. The data came back consistent. Orbital fleets had been neutralized, ground forces had been routed, and Overlord Cyrix was missing in action, presumably in full retreat. Planets that once trembled under VX rule took this chance to rise up, either aligning with humanity or declaring independence altogether. Rebellions sparked across the Empire, fueled by the knowledge that the VX were not as all-powerful as they claimed. In less than a week, everything the VX had built over decades started unraveling. The humans, with their hidden alliances and advanced stealth technology, had the upper hand on every front. But it was the emotional force behind it all that truly shattered the VX Empire. Their soldiers no longer faced frightened populations begging for mercy. They faced people who fought for their loved ones, a cause so strong that not even the threat of death could curb their determination. Even so, the humans did something unexpected. Instead of wiping the VX out entirely, something they likely could have accomplished with minimal effort, they chose a path of justice over vengeance. Once the bulk of the VX forces surrendered or were neutralized, Earth and its allies declared the alien leadership would face war crimes tribunals. They did not round up every last VX citizen to be slaughtered or enslaved. They specifically targeted the overlords and generals who had ordered these horrifying acts of cruelty. The VX homeworld was placed under quarantine, ensuring no one could leave until the legal process was complete. This move surprised many across the galaxy. After all, the VX had murdered children, ravaged colonies, and spread terror for decades. But humanity had something else to prove. They were driven by love and justice, not blind hatred. Thomas Mason, still mourning the loss of his daughter, testified at one of the tribunals. Many expected him to demand violent retribution. Instead, he spoke calmly about Ellie and what she represented. He said that by choosing to spare the VX civilian population, humans showed they were strong enough to deny the cycle of endless bloodshed. He believed that a lasting peace could only be built on compassion, even if it took immense strength to get there. The Galactic community took note. Races from distant sectors, who had once feared the VX or remained neutral to avoid conflict, started talking about forming new alliances. They saw that humanity had not only the will to fight, but also the moral restraint to punish only the guilty. So, in an outcome that shocked everyone, the VX Empire was dismantled. Overlord Cyrix and his high-ranking officials were found guilty of crimes against multiple species. Their reign ended behind the thick walls of interstellar prisons. Back on New Haven, the colony tried to pick up the pieces. The streets were quiet after so much chaos. Families held each other a little tighter. People made sure those who had lost loved ones felt the entire colony's support. The memory of Ellie Mason became a unifying force. In a clearing near where she had fallen, people built a simple but powerful monument. A statue showing a small girl holding her toy spaceship, forever reaching toward the sky. No words were needed. It was a symbol of hope, of love, and of the danger that comes from underestimating a caring heart. It became a place of reflection for everyone. Many would visit, leaving flowers or small tokens of remembrance, and they would leave feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Word about the monument spread to other worlds. Soon, visitors arrived to honor Ellie's memory. Delegations from newly freed planets came to show their gratitude. They credited the events on New Haven with sparking a cascade of rebellions that freed them from the VX. They would stand in front of the statue, tears in their eyes, recalling their own losses, their own children taken or their homes destroyed. And yet, standing there reminded them that compassion had shaped the tide of history. At the same time, the stealth fleet that had once remained in the shadows became more widely known. People whispered about the near-mythical technology that allowed these ships to slip in and out of systems without being detected. They also talked about the courage of the pilots who risked everything for a small colony. No one was quite sure how the fleet had stayed hidden for so long, but many were thankful it had, because it arrived exactly when it was needed. Rumors emerged that Earth might maintain this fleet as a deterrent against future threats. Others believed it would be decommissioned because the greatest threat, the VX, was already neutralized. Either way, it stood as a testament to what humans could do when pushed beyond their limit. Over time, the galaxy learned an important lesson. Fear is powerful, but it pales in comparison to the power that arises when parents, friends, and neighbors defend those they love. In countless discussions and debates, scholars try to understand how a child's tragic death could unravel one of the most terrifying regimes in known space. Some said it was fate, that Ellie's spirit was destined to unite people in righteous anger. Others believed it was the strategic brilliance of Earth's hidden colonization program. But everyone agreed on one thing. Once you stir the protective instincts of humanity, you had better be prepared for a fight unlike any other. For the VX themselves, the end of their empire was a harsh awakening. Many lower-ranked soldiers claimed they had no choice but to follow orders. They insisted that they were as much victims of Overlord Cyrix's regime as the rest of the galaxy. Whether that was true or not, the tribunals forced them to look at the consequences of their actions. Some expressed regret for the horrors they had inflicted. Others clung to resentment, unable to accept their empire had fallen so quickly. Over time, however, they had no choice but to adapt to a new reality where they were no longer fear conquerors, but rather a scattered people trying to rebuild under strict supervision. Historians often say that the day the VX killed Ellie Mason was the day their empire died. Everything after was just the fallout. For humanity, though, it was more than a military victory. It was a statement to every corner of the cosmos. We do not want war, but we will protect what we love. That message resonated far beyond the edges of human-claimed space. Alien diplomats reached out to form alliances, trade partnerships, and cooperative research programs. There was a sense that if humans could defeat the VX in such a swift, decisive manner, their friendship was worth more than their enmity. Some folks back on Earth even worried about the long-term consequences. Could all this newfound power make humans the next galactic bullies? But those who had witnessed the events at New Haven quickly dismissed that fear. They had seen that it wasn't about conquest or domination. It was about drawing a line in the sand when someone tried to take away what was most precious. And in the end, humans showed they could be strong and also merciful. In time, the story of New Haven turned into a legend told around dinner tables, campfires, and even in classrooms across different worlds. Children on faraway planets would learn about Ellie Mason, about how her tragic death sparked a revolution against tyranny. Teachers would pause to reflect on how a single act of cruelty had awakened the fierce loyalty of humanity. People from all backgrounds found hope in that story. It reminded them that compassion might look like a weakness on the surface, but when it is challenged, it can grow teeth sharper than any blade. Travelers who visited New Haven noticed how the colony still held onto its sense of community. New houses were built, new crops planted, and new dreams formed. Even though the streets bore scars from the conflict, there was an air of optimism in everything they did. The older settlers said they felt like they were living proof that you could face horror and still choose kindness. The younger generation, who had been shielded from the worst of the violence, grew up hearing first-hand accounts from their parents. They respected the sacrifice made that day and understood the weight of responsibility they now carried. From time to time, Earth's officers or galactic journalists would arrive to interview people who had fought in the uprising. They wanted to know how ordinary colonists managed to pull off such an extraordinary victory. Over and over, they got the same answers. We just did what we had to do, or we couldn't let them get away with harming our children. The interviews often ended with tears, both from the interviewers who were moved by the bravery and from the colonists who were reminded of the day they lost someone dear. Thomas Mason, whose name was now recognized far and wide, rarely gave interviews. He spent most of his time helping rebuild, guiding younger recruits who wanted to learn the skills he had used. Some of these recruits were inspired to join Earth's special forces, believing in a cause that went beyond personal glory. They wanted to stand guard so that no other innocent life would be snuffed out by those who thrived on fear. When cornered by a reporter or a curious traveler, Thomas would speak softly. He would talk about Ellie, how she loved the stars, and how, in the end, she became a symbol that brought entire civilizations together. He never called himself a hero. He simply said he was a father who did what any father would do if given the means. Perhaps the most striking effect of this entire saga was on the larger galactic stage. Governments who once bowed to strong-arm tactics or turned a blind eye to oppression began to rethink their positions. Some started adopting mutual defense pacts, ensuring that if any empire tried to use fear again, they would face a united force. A wave of new policies emerged, focusing on protecting civilian populations, regulating the treatment of prisoners of war, and ensuring that no single power could dominate so many star systems through terror alone. Much of this was driven by the example set by humanity, especially when word spread that they had the capacity to destroy but chose to show mercy. People across the galaxy started feeling a cautious sense of hope. They saw that standing up to a bully, even one as terrifying as the VX, could lead to real change. They also realized that true strength isn't about how loudly you can roar or how cruel you can be, but about how far you'll go to protect something or someone you cherish. The shift was slow in some regions, of course. Old habits die hard, and there were still smaller factions that believed in using fear to maintain control. But the new tide was undeniable. Societies began to place more value on unity and empathy, seeing them not as weaknesses, but as cornerstones of genuine strength. As the years rolled on, the memory of the VX Empire became a cautionary tale. Stories of their downfall were passed around in pubs, broadcast in documentaries, and recorded in academic journals. But the moral of the story was always the same. Fear can dominate for a while, but once you cross the line and hurt those who hold love as their greatest treasure, you'll face a force that can shatter empires. People who visited the statue of Ellie Mason on New Haven would say they felt a wave of emotion as they approached the figure of that little girl holding her toy spaceship. It was a mix of sadness, respect, and an odd sense of courage. It reminded them that even the smallest spark of tragedy could light a fire bright enough to guide entire worlds toward a better tomorrow. In the aftermath of everything, trade routes opened that connected distant star systems. Freed planets sent cultural ambassadors to Earth, hoping to learn from humans and share their own traditions. Interstellar art exhibits displayed sculptures and paintings from species once oppressed by the VX. Musicians composed songs about the day the snakes met their match. Even though the war had left scars, something beautiful was sprouting from the ashes. A galaxy more united, more open to friendship, and more willing to protect the vulnerable. People sometimes asked, would the VX have ever changed if Ellie Mason had not been killed? That question had no definite answer, but it did spark discussions on morality and destiny across the cosmos. Some believed the VX were too set in their ways, that eventually someone else would have stood up to them. Others insisted that only humanity, with its unique mix of compassion and hidden strength, could have toppled such a regime so quickly. Whatever the case, the tragedy in New Haven became a defining chapter in galactic history. It revealed that underestimating a kind-hearted species could be the gravest mistake of all. And so, if you ever find yourself wandering the outer rim, you might hear local folks sharing these tales under starry skies. They'll talk about an empire that tried to scare everyone into submission and failed because they chose the wrong target. They'll share the bittersweet legend of a brave child who became an unwitting catalyst for change, and of a father whose quiet fury showed the galaxy what happens when you push people too far. They'll recall how the might of stealth fleets and guerrilla tactics caught the VX off guard. Yet, underneath all that talk of military strategy, the heart of the story remains a simple truth. Fear breaks when it meets pure, unstoppable love. In the end, that is the story that resonated with so many. It wasn't advanced weaponry alone that toppled an empire, nor was it revenge that guided humanity's hand. It was the collective will of mothers and fathers, neighbors and friends, refusing to let cruelty have the final say. The galaxy watched, learned, and changed. And while many details might fade into myth over time, one thing will remain: the memory of how unstoppable predators discovered they were no match for determined hearts united in sorrow and galvanized by hope.